Welcome to the Daring Cities Conference. This is the Procurement Leadership Means Climate Action session. So I'd like to say good morning to you all, but also good afternoon and good evening, because I understand we have participants from around the world attending the session. I'm going to start off saying if climate is the problem, procurement is the solution. So this is why we're here, and procurement leadership means addressing climate action. That's what we're looking at today. So I'm Mark Kitson. I'm the Deputy Regional Director at ICLEI's European Secretariat, but also the Global Director for our Sustainable Procurement Capacity Centre. I'll be facilitating today's session. And just to make you aware of a colleague, Josephine Hinz, she will be helping with any technical problems if there are any. Do bear with us if there are. If you have any problems, just post them in the chat and we'll take a look at the problems. If you have difficulties, do leave the session and then come back in. That can sometimes solve any problems that you may have. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items. You're automatically muted. This is so that we can hear the speakers with their interventions. But you can post questions via the questions and answer function, and also any comments you have as well. And I'll be picking those up throughout, and I'll be putting those to the speakers, because we'll have some time at the end after the speakers' interventions to have a discussion. So we also want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded. The file will be shared on the Daring Cities website following this session. So essentially this session is going to focus on the power of procurement, and particularly in how it can be used to address climate action. I think from my experience of working with cities, I feel that procurement is maybe not used as much as it should be and not recognize the importance it can have. So this is something we want to highlight today, and we have some very good speakers who will be able to introduce us to this. I first want to have some words of welcome from our Secretary General. So I'd like to welcome Gino van Begen. Gino's been working for ICLEI for a number of years, over 20 years. We've been working closely on the procurement work together for many years, and he's consistently pushed this agenda. It wouldn't be as far as it is actually without Gino. And ICLEI is one of the key organizations working with cities on sustainable public procurement, and actually this is across the world in many different regions. So Gino, I'd like to hear you say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark, and distinguished participants and speakers. It's a real pleasure for me to join you at today's meeting and conference around green and sustainable procurement. I'm just want to bring a couple of words and a few thoughts to you on why and how to connect public procurement and climate action. Let me start by saying that also within these Daring Cities, and we have been running now sessions for an entire week, we clearly see that local and regional governments around the world are at the front line of addressing the climate emergency through local climate action. And they engage because they are at the forefront of dealing with the impacts of climate change. They experience these impacts already as institutions, as administrations, as owners of administration buildings, but more importantly, they experience it because and in their communities. And increasingly we see that subnational government is committing to the necessary ambitious targets towards climate neutrality by, for example, operating with 100% renewables or aiming for zero emission construction sites. We'll hear more about that in today's conference here. We, from our side, 5 years ago, as ICLEI, we launched with the city of Seoul the global lead city network on sustainable procurement. And we saw in this initiative a necessary means to connect and to showcase globally the power of procurement to take climate action. Now, members of our global lead city network have exactly done that. They have set ambitious targets that connect procurement to the achievement of climate targets. And as part of this GLCN, we prioritized 4 sectors that hold most leverage over tackling the climate crisis. And I want to briefly outline 2 of them. Looking at the transport sector, which contributes around 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions, cities can use their procurement power to influence how their public fleet is fueled, how public services and goods are delivered or transported, and to reshape actually the city transportation infrastructure. For example, the city of Buenos Aires, I understand, aims for 50% reduction of emissions in the transport sector, in their transport sector, by 2035, so within 15 years' time. And the city of Rotterdam, for example, works towards a zero emission delivery of maintenance tools and staff. The second sector that we think is really important is the public construction and infrastructure sector, where public procurement can really come in. And here we understand that cities can reduce emissions through the incentives for refurbishing their buildings to improve energy performance and the resilience to climate change, or procure buildings with sustainable sourced materials and that have materials that have a life cycle perspective. And for example, the city of Helsinki has a target to achieve this year 100% of the public construction contracts to include precisely such sustainability criteria. The remaining 2 other priority sectors of the 4 that we have been concentrated on are energy and food. And I invite you to explore what our cities in ICLE under the GLCN, the Global Leader City Network, and others are doing in these 2 sectors through our website information. But I also understand that there will be 2 opportunities, Mark, at the Daring Cities here, and I believe on the 19th of October, to actually dive deeper into the topics of sustainable procurement in the sectors of construction and of food. So allow me, Mark, to just close my introduction with 2 points. First of all, I strongly believe that cities are and can be champions in public procurement, in providing leadership of connecting public procurement to climate action. But they are dealing with a global challenge, and therefore it is my strong belief that a collaboration between all levels of government is absolutely necessary to advances in this agenda. It's absolutely required to seek that collaboration at all levels. And in this time of a climate crisis, with a global pandemic that is raging on throughout the world, as well with an economic turmoil as a result, it matters more than ever to make deliberate choices on if, how, and what we consume and produce. And here also, the example setting, the power of procurement at the local and subnational level is immense. I believe that procurement has indeed a very strong impact and can have a very strong impact. So let's make it count. Thank you very much, Mark, for allowing me to come into this session with these introductory words. I would once again like to thank very much already in advance our speakers of today. Many of you are those champions. I'm delighted to hear more from your experiences on the ground. Thank you very much, Mark, and over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gino. And I'm pleased that you're able to spend some time with us this morning, because I know it's a busy time with the conference. I really appreciate that. And as I say, your support in this topic area over the years has been very valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for the participants, I've been teasing you a little bit here because we have some excellent speakers. And whilst ICLE, I think, facilitates sustainable public procurement, and we develop tools and research and undertaking capacity building, it's actually the cities that have been doing the work and implementation, but also these other organizations out there as well doing this work and that we work closely with. So I'd like to introduce you to our speakers before we go to the speeches. Alderman Marion Newwood. She is the council member for the spatial planning environment at the City of Cape Town, South Africa. She'll be speaking shortly. We also have Espen Nicolaisen, and we've been working closely with them. He's a head of section on sustainable public procurement at the City of Oslo, and he's certainly our go-to person when we need some technical inputs about how it works and how can you develop SBP within a city and getting practical hands-on experience. Then we have a video intervention from the mayor, William Peduto. He's the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, who's recently joined our global Lead Cities network. It's a video conference because of the time zone, but he's obviously very keen on this work. So it'll be interesting to hear what he says. And then we'll have Paolo Maini. He's the head of the Procurement Infrastructure Public Procurement Division, OECD. And I probably just ruined your second name there, Paolo. I can never get it right. After all these years we've been working together. But Paolo's been had 10 years experience of working in the public sector, and we work closely with the OECD, which I think is a very good match between what they do and how we're working with cities. Before we go to the speeches, first of all, actually we'd like to put a poll to the participants. Now our first poll is going to be, do you already dare to use public purchasing to tackle the climate crisis? Now this, you may think this is a simple question, but it's an important one, because in our experience is that, and as I said in the introduction, not everybody always thinks about how procurement can be used for tackling the climate crisis. So it would be good if you could answer the question. We'll give the results back actually in well, maybe 30 seconds. And then this will give us an idea, I think, about who's in the audience. So the answers, if you can't see the box on your screen, but you should be able to do, it says, no, this is a new approach for me. Yes, this is something I already work on. No, until now, I thought there are more effective approaches. So far, it's looking like there's a clear lead with 69%. Yes, this is something I already work on. So that will be interesting. So do post your comments about what you're doing. It'd be good to hear that. We will take a look at those throughout this session and after. But it's 31%, so say, no, this is a new approach for me. And that doesn't necessarily surprise me. As I say, it's not always recognized. In many cases, the procurement is seen as just an administrative function. Okay, so I think that's most people voted, and it's still around 69% that yes, this is something I already work on. 31%, no, this is a new approach for me. Fortunately, no, until now, I thought there were more effective approaches is 0%. So that's good, you're in the right session. Okay, so to close the poll, you can press the X in the top right of that box, and then we can continue. So thank you very much for that. So now I think it would be good to go into our first keynote speaker, really. I mean, I think this is quite interesting. We've been working with Alderman Newvold and the city quite a lot. So I'd like to hear about what you have to say in terms of public procurement. So if you'd like to take the floor, Marion.
Thank you so much, and especially thank you and greetings to Gino. Good to hear you and to see a vision of you. It's a sunny, wonderful summer day from Cape Town, and today I'm very fortunate and glad that I'm a Cape Townian, so I wish we could have the opportunity to welcome you all in Cape Town. Green procurement is one of those things that is a very good principle, and it's easier said, and I think a topic that we all want to engage with, but it's not so easy to make a statement in form of a practice around it. We've started with the process of, well, let's rather call it awareness since 2016. And up till then, it was just a notion somewhere in some reports to council. But we've moved steadily along since then. And today I can really report to ICLEI that their involvement in Cape Town and the ability to navigate influence around our own processes and the processes of national governments are really paying off. We have recently finalized a Green Procurement Action Plan, and it will go to Council shortly for full endorsement. The Green Procurement Action Plan seeks to give effect to the city's commitment to green procurement and seeks to consolidate and mainstream the implementation of green procurement in the city. The mainstreaming thereof is the difficult part. The action plan was developed through extensive engagement and input from a range of different line functions in the city to get everybody's buy-in, otherwise it's still just a glossy document. The action plan is underpinned by the following key principle. The first, and for me personally, it's the crucial one that we need to make implementable. It's the life cycle approach. Procurement decisions should consider the whole life cycle of a product or service. As such, projects or services which may present a short-term saving at the expense of long-term negative environment impacts, or those which have the potential to create significant negative externalities, should be avoided. Preventing, minimizing and mitigating impacts. Procurement decisions should ensure that any potential negative environmental and social impacts of a product or service to be procured are prevented, and where these cannot be completely prevented, at least should be minimized or mitigated. Resource efficiency. Procurement decisions should ensure that products and services take into account the need for resource efficiency, both in terms of the service that the city provides to the public and the day-to-day running of its own operations. The circular economy. Procurement decisions should ensure projects and services take into account these three principles of circularity, namely design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use by purchasers, or durability, reuse, remanufacturing, and recycling, and regenerate natural systems. As an example, we are very proud that the last two buildings that the City of Cape Town have built is, for an example, as a leading role player in this noble exercise. We have built two green buildings, which I think is a milestone. And from my own personal experience, I think we've taken the infrastructure department by surprise. They were building the green buildings on our advice, and I think it's a major milestone that we need to celebrate. Our action plan has 7 key objectives, namely, 1, to ensure the city has in place appropriate policy to support green procurement, including associated administrative tools and processes and practices. Objective 2, to maximize the city's sourcing and purchasing of sustainable products, to maximize the city's sourcing and purchasing of sustainable services. Objective 4, to increase the number of green or sustainable buildings built by the city, and the long-term aim of completely the transition to green and sustainable building. Objective 5, to incorporate green procurement into the city large capital projects as a leading example to the rest of the sector. Objective 6, to communicate effectively with the public, city contractors and city staff regarding green procurement to get at least to a consideration of adapting your lifestyle. Monitoring and evaluate the city's performance in terms of green procurement, with the emphasis on the efficient measuring of resource usage. The action plan further has 20 outcomes and 47 actions or activities aimed to achieving the above objectives. Some of the important actions outlined in this Green Procurement Action Plan that the city will focus in the short term. Remember, it's a long-term aim. Undertaking, firstly, a demand analysis to determine priority areas for intervention, the so-called and generally accepted low-hanging fruit. We accept that we have committed to very high and ambitious targets, and it will ask a lot of us, but we are really passionate and motivated to really do what we need to do and have to do to achieve those targets. We need to develop a flow of RFQs and tenders indicating options of integration of green procurement and environmental legal compliance into the process, whereby currently it is all about compliance to the financial realm. Undertake a prioritization process and feasibility analysis to determine priority good purchasing groups to make a decision that where we can have the most impact, we need to target those areas of purchasing. Undertake a prioritization process and feasibility analysis to determine the material groups that we need to influence. Investigate the feasibility of developing guidelines and specification for each of the utilities and transport-related material groups within the city stock items. Undertake a prioritization process to determine priority in the directorates and or departments. And here again, the emphasis is where we can have the quickest turnaround and also the largest impact. Develop a set of guidelines and specification to prioritize directorates and departments' processes in order to get to the full cycle assessment of products. Develop sustainable building guidelines based on the equivalent of a minimum of at least a GB CSA 4-star standard. At this stage, the City of Cape Town do have a green building guidelines, but it's not been legislated at this stage. Further, to implement the city buildings retrofit program, we have obtained some success in retrofitting specifically the light usage, but we will report further on that. Develop a set of sustainable design principles for various types of capital and infrastructure projects. And I think this is just to strengthen the argument of Juno to say that the City of Cape Town have a capital budget of 9.5 billion rand, which is a major input into the economy. So if we can turn this spending around, there will be a remarkable influence in the impact that we have on our local environment, also globally. We also need to develop a set of specifications for the use of recycled building materials to ensure that it still be used in a safe and secure way. We need to develop a series of case studies of successful green procurement, because remember, we really learn the best by illustrating what we mean. And we intend of holding a annual project manager training and activation session for the city project managers to keep them motivated and really to have this a mainstream target throughout the city. And from my side, the mainstream of the green procurement is currently our objective for the immediate future. We also aim to have a sustainable buying power to our large consumers of goods and services, because that is the way that we should influence the market, not only by setting regulations, but also activate that regulations in supporting the green procurement process and products. It can be leveraged in the support of economy recovery, but not only stimulate local economic development, but also drive the green economy, promote environment sustainability and resource efficiency. For example, we have for a number of years now target an area of Cape Town, Atlantis, for the development and also the sustainability of the green economy target for that part of the city. And I think it's going well. The city have land available, and we have some incentives available for all the either services or product industrial role players to settle down in Cape Town and be part and parcel of our green economy in future. In particular, we want to have the outcomes and activity outlined in the Green Procurement Action Plan to aim at the stimulation of local economic development and supporting green job creation, and can be leveraged into Build Back Better. And therefore, we also aim to have a much more emphasis of lesser travel, to be more efficiently in time spending, but also then careful on the CO2 emissions through the, currently our problems around our linear city spatial form, that we need to make very sure that in the next generation of spatial plans, that this is the target, that we need to lessen the need for travel in our city. In a planning future beyond COVID-19, it is critical to recognize that climate change poses a similar future risk to economic stability, life and livelihood, but it will be harder to mitigate, adapt at once the projected effects are being experienced. It is not the easy time that we choose to do this transformation, but it's a necessary time that we are able to rethink, redo, and we need to take this time to get stronger back to the things that we need to do right. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Marion, for that. That sums up quite a bit of work that you're doing. And actually, I'm pleased to say the City of Cape Town were actually one of the founders of the Global Lead City Network, which really was only 4 or 5 years ago that we started that, and the city has come a long way. We'll come back for questions, Marion, at the panel at the end. But I just want to pick up, just to also highlight that you mentioned the prioritization exercise, which I know has been quite important for the City of Cape Town. And I would recommend this to other cities as well. It's absolutely key, I think, to identify, I would say, key sectors, but also key priorities for the city, and try and address those through procurement. I think one, because you can really address environmental and social issues if you identify the right sectors to work in, but also you're addressing issues that matter to the city. And I know that's something that you've been doing very well there. Yeah, and the other point I think you mentioned about important to use cities to drive the economy, that, I mean, that is absolutely essential. I mean, it's about the environment, economy, and really addressing societal challenges. That's what procurement can be used for. We'll come back later, because I think there's a couple of questions coming up in the chat, and people, the participants, please do post your questions and answers. I'm picking some up. There's also a comment already from the City of Melbourne saying they're in the process of including 7 sustainable procurement approaches in their sourcing strategy. They've also mentioned that they think it's about promoting local and promoting special needs groups, and promoting environmental, sustainable and circular economy and the green future, which I think that's just been highlighted. So next up, I'm excited to share from our newest member a video from our latest Global Lead City member, as I've mentioned. This is the Honourable Mayor William Perutu. He's shared with us why public procurement matters for their work on urban resilience and climate action. So if we can play the video now, you should all be able to see and hear it.
Hi, I'm Bill Peduto, Mayor of the City of Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, when we think about procurement and leadership in building a more sustainable world, we think of the budget process and we put it through a lens of resiliency. We look at each of our departments and how we spend and how we have the opportunity to meet three important goals for 2030. The first, a zero landfill policy that will take away from the need of having garbage put into our earth. A second, a 50% reduction in the amount of energy that we're using and the amount of water. And finally, operating our entire city by 2030 off 100% renewable energy. Each of those goals have specific ways that the budget can dictate our benchmarking to making sure that we meet all three of them. The second way we look at it is through an initiative that we took with 11 other cities around the world, disinvesting our pension fund from fossil fuels. Pittsburgh is where coal was discovered in North America, where oil was discovered just north of Pittsburgh in Franklin, PA. And we sit on one of the largest natural gas seams, the Marcellus and the Utica, in the world. However, we know that our future does not have to be connected to our past. And as we look for ways to be able to build out new industry here in Western Pennsylvania, we also are looking for ways to invest our pension funds into those types of companies that will be a part of the 21st century. Finally, we're looking at the larger picture. In Pittsburgh, we're looking across all of Northern Appalachia and looking for cities to partner with us on a new American Marshall Plan, a plan that will invest in the areas that will be hurt the most from the transition of fossil fuels to renewable energies, and allowing those areas to get a head start in building out the industry of tomorrow by being able to pool resources from pension funds and other types of programs to be able to help the companies to make that transition and take care of the people in the communities they call home. Procurement gives cities the opportunities to lead and to build the type of world that we all want to live in.
All right, thank you very much for that video. We'll be putting that video, of course, on the Daring Cities website as well. We're pleased, of course, that the City of Pittsburgh are participating in the Global Lead City Network. I think there'll be a lot to share with the different cities around the world on what they're doing. So the next speaker is Espen de Carlesen from the City of Oslo. As I mentioned, he's head of section Sustainable Public Procurement at the City of Oslo. But his main responsibilities is to influence and facilitate the process of integrating sustainable public procurement and to ensure that the city's sustainability goals are at the heart of all the city's procurement processes. That's a no easy task, Espen. So how do you do that? And can you sum all that up in 7 to 8 minutes or so?
Thanks for the introduction, Mark. I'll see what I can do. I will talk fast and try to show you at least a little bit about what the City of Oslo is doing. Yeah, so as you said, I'm head of sustainable section in the central procurement unit in the City of Oslo. And the main object for me and my team is to work strategically with sustainable procurement and ensure that we reach our goals in this area for the city. The City of Oslo, of course, supports the UN Sustainability Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. And we always strive to find new ways to increase social and environmental benefits from our procurement actions. So Oslo is a rather small capital in European scale, but we believe that our efforts on climate-friendly procurements have made some impact, and yeah, it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about it. In this short presentation, I will give you an introduction to our targets, strategies, and methods we use to push the supply market in a green direction. So the City of Oslo purchases for about 3 billion euros annually, and this includes procurement of goods, services, and construction works. And we have what we call a decentralized procurement model, meaning that all the agencies and city districts are responsible for their own procurements. And in 2017, a new procurement strategy was adopted for Oslo, where the vision was a greener, more creative, and socially inclusive city. The strategy has indeed a green profile and states that the goal of becoming an emission-free city shall always be the basis when planning new procurements. We also have the climate strategy, which is another important steering document. This strategy points out the most important measures needed to cut emissions in Oslo. By 2030, all vehicles, all cars, buses, trucks, and construction machinery must be without climate emission within the border of Oslo. And this does not only affect the mobility sector, all energy production and use needs to be without direct emission as well. Fossil heating in houses must be replaced, and carbon capture is needed in our waste incineration facilities. So the climate strategy shows us the way to the emission-free city. We also have the climate budget, which plays an important role in how we are going to become fossil-free. The climate budget is an innovation in public governance. The budget is a tool to reduce emission in order to reach our climate goals. Oslo was, as far as we know, the first city in the world to introduce a climate budget. It was presented for the first time in 2017 together with the financial budget. Finally, the climate budget is fully integrated in the financial budget process. So we are budgeting towards the future by identifying the measures and instruments needed to reach our targets. The emission impact of each measure is estimated, and the responsible unit for implementation is identified. And the budget clearly states what has to be done, by whom, when, and at what cost. In Oslo, we strongly believe that emission reduction are not to be implemented somewhere else, at another time, or by somebody else. We want to take responsibility now, and we have ambitious targets, and our goal is to reduce emission by 95% in 2030. So 2030 is only 10 years from now, soon to be 9, and we have discovered the past years that procurement play an important role in cutting emissions. And we are very satisfied with our suppliers, which have shown us that they are more than ready to compete on providing us the best climate-friendly solution, just as long as they get awarded for it. And this acknowledgement has led us to different sub-targets for the mobility sector. The first target listed is already successfully reached. In all our tenders, we now have a minimum requirement stating that all machines and vehicles used in the construction works must be biofuels. And recently, the city government also decided that all construction work in Oslo shall be fossil-free, not only the municipal projects. But replacing diesel with biofuels is, of course, only the start. And I would like to emphasize that the next targets on requiring zero-emission technologies only apply for our own contracts, the municipal contracts. The past years, we have challenged the market if they can provide us with zero-emission solutions. There's been a rapid technological development, and more zero-emission machines are now entering the market. We award the suppliers who do investments in these machines and give them extra credit in our tenders if they use them in our projects. We will, of course, continue to award zero-emission technology the next 4 years, but from 2025, zero emission will be stipulated as a minimum requirement. And the same applies for deliveries of goods and services on our contracts. From 2025, the transport must be done either with zero emission or biogas vehicles. And the last target is related to public transport in Oslo. From 2028, our own public transport company, which operates both in Oslo and the neighboring county Viken, will be 100% zero emission. We have already reached some milestones in our work with green procurements. The first I would like to mention is the first zero emission construction site in the world, which you can see a picture of here. This project was about upgrading streets and pavements. Not a complicated or large project, but perfect for piloting zero emission technology. This was successfully achieved with the use of electric machines like excavators and wheel loaders. Another great project I would like to highlight is the retrofitting or upgrading of our local ferries. 1 out of 3 ferries that commute between Oslo and the neighboring municipality of Nesodden is now battery electric, and the remaining ferries will be upgraded in the years to come. We also have great focus on our own vehicle fleet. The municipality owns more than 1,400 vehicles. And for passenger cars and van, which counts for most of the fleet, 71% is now zero emission. And hopefully we will reach 100% in short time. And finally, I want to mention our work on using environmental criteria for transport in our goods and service tenders. We put a high percentage weighting on environmental performance, often as high as 30%, and give credit to the suppliers that use zero emission vehicles. Our experience is that this method has been really effective, which I will show you on the next slide. Here you can see results from using environmental criteria in tenders. We are quite proud of this table. It shows the share of zero emission and biofuel vehicles our suppliers use for deliveries in some of our citywide framework agreements. 1 year ago, we could gather all the contracts with good results in a small table. Now we do not have enough space on one page. For us, this proves that it works to ask for climate-friendly transport in tenders. How we can reduce the total carbon footprint and environmental impact from our procurements. This is an area we are now investigating increasingly. Studies indicate that the indirect emissions can be many times higher than the direct emissions. And Oslo's climate goal focus on how we can be carbon neutral within the city borders. But emissions outside Oslo is not covered. We want to address this since our procurement action causes high emissions in other countries, both from production and when transporting goods to us. You all have probably seen this figure before. It is important to pinpoint the need for holistic thinking when working with green procurements. Reducing the direct emission by transition to clean vehicles and machinery is only the first step. We need to include the whole process and close the loop so that our resources does not go to waste. We do not have many examples to showcase yet, but I would like to talk about some of our focus areas. The first is building materials. We are now looking into how we can increase the amount of recycled materials in our building projects. This comes in addition to our effort on demanding materials with low emissions. Food is also of great importance to the city of Oslo and includes both the public health aspect and how we purchase food with lower emissions. The next steps are to reduce food waste in our canteens and make a shift towards more plant-based meals in the municipality. And finally, a good example where we have a circular approach is our production of biogas. Food waste from the city is collected and turned into biogas, which we use as fuel for our waste trucks and buses. On my last slide, I would like to tell you about our approach and methods in using procurement as a tool to reach climate goals. To have politically adopted strategies with clear targets is of high importance. The role procurement plays must be highlighted, and this message must be communicated to the personnel involved with procurements, and this of course also includes the leaders. In that way, the whole organization is able to work together. The strategies and targets should also be kept in focus. And for us, the climate budget has been efficient in that sense, since we have to report on our efforts 3 times a year. Capacity building is also often mentioned in forums like these, and this is for a good reason. I believe that it is important to have dedicated personnel working with green procurements, and in that way we can work strategic and find solutions for many areas at the same time. And we also have good experience when cooperating with international networks like the Big Buyers Initiative, C40, and Carbon Neutral City Alliance. And when it comes to tendering, our approach is to give high weighting on environmental performance. By awarding climate-friendly solutions, we reduce the risk for our suppliers so they can do the necessary investments. We also try to standardize our environmental criteria, and in that way the suppliers know what we want in all our tenders, and this reduces the risk of necessary investments. And finally, the supplier dialogue is important. We always try to communicate our goals to the supplier market. Their feedback is necessary. And if they cannot meet our requirements, then it is possible to work together with the potential barriers that may exist to reach our goals. Hope this was a little bit interesting and inspirational maybe for how we're working with green procurement, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Espen. Definitely inspirational. I would say Oslo have been working on this for some time now, and you've managed really to showcase the clear links between procurement and climate, and particularly in key areas that are sometimes quite difficult to tackle. And I think you're seeing, well, not just you, but I think we're all seeing the results of the work that you've done. This is, of course, why we're quite happy that Oslo are part of the Global Lead Cities Network and able to profile what you're doing to show it can be done. I think what's important is the political support, which you mentioned, and I know Oslo does have that. It's not always essential, but it does help a lot. I can clearly in advancing SPP, not only comprehensively, but also quickly, I think. I think that's important, and the ambitious plans that you now have. I mean, you started off at a smaller scale and built it up quite quickly, and it is now ambitious what you're doing. And I think that really sends a signal, not just to the city through the different departments, but also to citizens and now to other cities worldwide. We'll come back. I think there's a few questions popping up for you as well, Espen. So take a look at the chat as well. You can prepare yourself. I'm going to select some of them. But I'd like to really connect from the local to the national. And I mentioned at the start that we work with a number of key organizations, and the OECD have been doing some excellent work in the area for sustainable public procurement for a number of years as well. So I'd like to introduce Paolo, and he will be able to sort of outline what they're doing. So that the floor is yours, Paolo, and hopefully you can imagine a round of applause as you're stepping up.
Hello, thank you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I will share now my screen. I have a short presentation for you. I wanted, to build on the previous presentations and bring you some evidence of the things that international organizations can provide to you, but also make you understand that you are not alone in this journey. This is something that is shared in many different public authorities around the world. And we see this momentum coming up. I will provide you with some evidence on that. We are an economic organization. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is building a lot of evidence around the world. And I will share with you a few numbers and data around it. We know that procurement matters. Procurement is a major economic activity. It is necessary for delivering public services to citizens and for achieving broader policy goals. We heard about it in the previous presentations. And over the recent months, we also understood the strategic role of public procurement throughout the pandemic, the response to the crisis. And I will also share with you some evidence we collected from the member countries in terms of the challenges to the procurement systems and how we can use these findings to improve procurement at the national, and also at the city level. Just to give you some numbers, procurement accounts for 12% of GDP in OECD area. It can go easily to 20–30% of GDP in developing countries. And of that volume, 2/3 are spent at the subnational level. Hence the relevance of the subnational dimension, the relevance of cities and regions for achieving the procurement goals. So, I think it's quite clear for everybody that when we are delivering services to citizens, we are procuring goods, services, and infrastructure. And for that, we need human capital in order to provide services. So that's not a novelty to anyone here. But I also wanted to share with you some of the services that are being procured through using public procurement. So we have services to guarantee physical conditions like mobility, waste disposal, water, security, services to guarantee basic social conditions like health, education, housing, but also the quality of life. And in OECD countries, we are seeing more and more the linkage between budget and impact in the quality of life. We see some countries developing budgets around well-being dimensions. We heard about Oslo connecting budget to climate action. So I think it's important that you understand that it's possible to make the connection between an administrative function and then the impact that this function has in terms of the life of the citizens. So I think it's quite clear now for all of us here that it's possible to achieve strategic objectives and local government priorities with public procurement. I listed here in the slide some of these strategic objectives. We have seen this approach to broader outcomes, in terms of sustainability, in terms of local development, in terms of innovation, circular economy. Many of these objectives were already mentioned and shared by the previous speakers, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it's also important that we can tackle climate changes through public procurement and through local authorities and cities. When we started this work, and Mark mentioned that we have been doing that for a number of years, and that is correct. Already back in 2015, the OECD recognized the strategic dimensions of public procurement. So we adopted a framework, we call it a recommendation. We have around 200 recommendations on different policy areas that are active and adopted by the OECD Council. And we have one on public procurement, and that recommendation brought together this framework and these 12 integrated principles that look at procurement from a comprehensive approach, but also bringing the notion of the strategic value of procurement. And we have a principle on balance that precisely connects the value for money with the complementary policy objectives that can be achieved through procurement. And I wanted to give you some evidence. You see that when looking at the OECD recommendation, we provided tools and of course a lot of guidance for countries to use the recommendation. It's part of our policy cycle. On top of that, last year we tried to understand how OECD countries and beyond were using the recommendation. And we collected a lot of information about the way OECD countries were moving in using procurement in a strategic way. And you see here on the slide, almost all OECD countries are using procurement, not just at the national level, but also at the subnational levels. So for instance, for achieving green procurement, for using procurement to support small and medium enterprises, or for addressing innovation. But we see also the pickup of procurement for other policy objectives, like for instance, responsible business conduct and other social considerations as well. So it's very interesting to see that the policymakers, they already understood the value of public procurement. They are starting to apply it in their concrete procurements. But on top of that, it's important to recognize that there is still an issue in terms of monitoring and evaluating. And we saw that when we did this report that is available on the website, So countries they still don't have in place frameworks to monitor and evaluate the impact of their procurement strategies, and that is something that we need to work on. In terms of the impact of the pandemic, it's clear that we had the first phase on reacting to the crisis. Now we are looking at the consequences, but we are already thinking about the rebuild. And for the rebuild phase, we believe that public procurement and infrastructure will play a very important role. The OECD adopted the recommendation on the governance of infrastructure in July, and that is why now we have infrastructure and public procurement as part of the same division and the same portfolio. We understood the value of procurement for delivering infrastructure, and that is the reason why we have these two work streams together. So some of the issues that we collected, we have a stock-taking report on the country's response to the pandemic, and we also developed a policy brief that is available also on the website. We saw issues regarding the regulatory frameworks, questions about the risk management that was not available and it was not ready in order to allow countries and public authorities to understand the impact of the global supply chains. The procurement strategies were not adapted clearly to the situation. And then something that was mentioned already before in this session, the coordination between the different levels of government. We saw in many countries, depending on the governance structure, federal countries, we saw public authorities competing for the same type of goods, and that was not easy to solve, but we saw some collaboration and coordination coming up. We saw the engagement with the market and the dialogue with the private sector as a clear response, and that's something that is going to be used going forward. So what we can do in terms of the cities after the pandemic, we need to strengthen the resilience of cities. We believe there are some long-term actions in cities, and we heard already some of the examples from cities that are already looking at the procurement in order to improve the quality of their services. But we need to rethink what and how public authorities procure. And we believe that having this sustainability lens is going to provide cities with the necessary framework to understand the value of public procurement and to achieve inclusiveness and sustainability. So we believe that cities could be developing these open and collaborative approaches with the private sector in delivering public services and infrastructure programs. We see a lot of thinking around agile procurement, not just in the ICT sector where agile strategies were first developed, but also in many other public service delivery. And we believe cities play an important role going forward. So in this slide, the one before the last, I have here some ideas in the way forward that we can discuss throughout this webinar. So the need to develop risk management strategies in the public procurement processes, the need to improve coordination. We already heard previous speakers talking about capabilities and capacity of the procurement workforce, but also it's important to involve citizens in the decision-making process. This is my third intervention this week. We had parallel events. The European Week of Regions and Cities is going on at the same time. And some of the participants already attended other sessions, and we discussed in those sessions, how cities can be sustainable and can achieve sustainability through public procurement, but they need to involve the stakeholders, and it was very interesting to see some of the examples around it. And of course, I believe this knowledge sharing, networking, intermunicipal coordination, it will be important going forward. And finally, two points on the acceleration of digital transformation that was brought by the pandemic. And finally, the need to work on the measurement and data collection in order to make your decisions based on evidence. I wanted to finalize just by bringing you a project that we are developing in close collaboration with ICLE. We already signed Bratislava. We hope to sign other cities, like for instance, Oslo. And in this project, we are providing a case study to each city in terms of the way they are using their procurement in a strategic way. But we can also partner with the cities to reinforce the capacity to use procurement strategically. And for instance, just for your information, we worked with Norway, and with Norway, we assessed the way they were using the public procurement system at the national level in terms of sustainability. We applied the methodology called the MAPS, the Sustainable Public Procurement module of this methodology. The report is also available on the website. And we helped, of course, Norway achieving the action plan and improving the data collection in their e-procurement system for understanding the value of procurement. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for that. And it's always good to end on an initiative that participants can get involved in. So, of course, if there's any interest there, do contact Paolo or contact us, and we'll forward it on to Paolo. So I'd like to ask all the speakers to put on their videos again, and they can unmute themselves whilst we're doing that. Before we go into the panel, just want to launch the second poll quickly, and this is again straightforward question. Procurement can, and there's a number of options you can see: help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, can reduce the overall use of resources, support local SMEs, enable a city to become a role model to its citizens, achieve both environmental and economic targets, and be challenging to use for climate action, particularly if the lowest price decision dominates. I presume you can only click one, otherwise I would click all of them. But let's see. So let's just give that 30 seconds, and then we've got quite a number of questions. We may not be able to get through them all, but I've selected some of the key ones for our panelists. But the results, let's give it a few more seconds. Seem to be quite evenly mixed at the moment. Let's give it another 5 seconds. As I say, I hope that people can only press 1. Yeah, so it's quite mixed, but there's an 80%, and that's to achieve both environmental and economic targets. But I think with the current pandemic and the current crisis, I'm not surprised with that one. I mean, it has to be essential that they go hand in hand. You can't just tackle environment without tackling economic issues and societal challenges. So that one's sticking out, but the other ones seem to be fairly even. Maybe to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the second highest. Again, I think that's quite key with the climate crisis that we're facing. Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm going to go on to the questions now. So I hope our panelists can hear me. I'm going to select a couple of the questions that have come up through the chat, first of all. And for the first one, it would be good, I'm going to ask it to the cities. And this is the question come from David, but I would like a response that's just either a yes, no, or a sort of. Now, from David, he's asked, sometimes green procurement saves money, like with investments in energy efficiency, but sometimes it costs more. Do your procurement personnel have a clear mandate for paying a premium for environmental sustainability? And it's a question about do the procurers have a mandate to say, well, yes, they can pay a premium for environmental sustainability. So Espen, let's start with you on that one first. It's a yes, no, or a sort of.
Kind of yes.
A kind of yes. Okay, okay. Marianne, I think the question actually was after your presentation. You answered it partly in the chat from a political perspective, so it wasn't. It seemed to be a yes.
I think we will go with a yes and sort of. It depends on what department.
Yes, I think that's a good answer. I suspect in most places it's not a yes, you can spend more on any product or service. I guess it depends on the sector. I guess it's done on a case-by-case basis, and I guess in most cases that permission is required if a product or service is clearly going to cost more. Okay, well, let's move to the next questions. And this may be to you, Paolo. It can't be a yes or no, I don't think. And I think it would be good to answer it in a minute or two if possible. But yeah, amidst the COVID-19 crisis and recovery, how can procurement work for both the economic recovery as well as continued sustainability efforts? I mean, this could be a whole session on its own, but maybe just name sort of the 2 or 3 key reflections on that in a couple of minutes, if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that will take us to an entire new session, and we can think about it for Daring Cities 2021 or something like that. I would say that we see many countries and regional blocs like the European Union linking the recovery plans to sustainability, imposing sustainability objectives to countries in terms of the way they are using the money, and making a clear link with the money that is being given to the economy. So we see countries concerned about using the money in a sustainable way. You know, for instance, stopping traveling by airplane if there are alternatives by train and things like that. And we see the importance of infrastructure plans. So we have countries looking at shovel-ready projects that can be used immediately. We know that infrastructure programs, they take time to mature, but at the same time, we need to look at the dimensions that can be quickly activated for achieving that. So we see there is a clear linkage between sustainability and economic recovery. It's up to us to take this opportunity, because at the same time, you know, sustainability was not the first priority when you responded to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important to bring it back to the agenda. Mm.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's, yeah, in the time. I appreciate that answer. Okay, and just a sort of a quick question, and maybe we'll take a deeper dive in some others. Question here is about the monitoring. Now that came up, I think, in most of the presentations. So the question is, you know, on top of the inspiring plans, I think it's Kariolis Granicus. Apologies if I'm not pronounced that name right. Says, I'm interested in the plans to measure the uptake of green procurement. You know, do the cities have a tangible plan of monitoring? Maybe we can go to Marian on that, and then to you, Espen. How are you dealing with monitoring? It's not an easy topic.
Yeah, it's not an easy topic, but a necessity. Remember, we are still in the phase that we constantly need to convince people. Mm. The best mechanism to convince people is to show evidence. So I think from the start, monitoring is built into the plan and the assessment thereof. It's also part of our overall measurement of the city's activity and the progress of the city. Yes, we do have strong monitoring and assessments, measurements.
Espen, what's from your side?
Well, we of course have the climate budget, where we try to monitor it and where we report back on how we're doing. But still, monitoring the real emissions is of course very difficult, and we see that how we do it, and this is done on the state level in Norway. We get this changes all the time how they're doing it, and that means that you thought you were on the right way, and then suddenly it shows that maybe the emissions have gone up the last years because they've changed something in the measurement methods. So this is quite difficult, but we have the climate budget, which we use and see if we are implementing the measures that we've set in place in the climate budget. And yeah, this gives us some knowledge on how we're doing, at least. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, if I may just jump on this one, sorry. Mm-hmm. You know, for instance, in Norway, the e-procurement system, we worked with DIFI, the previous name of the agency, And we managed to expand the number of indicators that were collected through the procurement system, not just to target the green dimension, but also looking at economic and social dimensions. So it's a question of designing the indicators. For instance, just to bring an example from outside of Europe, New Zealand is developing the broader outcomes budget. So they are looking at well-being dimensions, and they are developing a series of policy targets. And they are using procurement for achieving that. We are working with New Zealand closely to develop these studies and these indicators, to develop a framework that is capable of capturing the impact of these broader outcomes in the procurement process. And France, for instance, last week, they launched the green budget, for the first time, a comprehensive budget around green and sustainable. So there are some initiatives that can be used, but definitely using e-procurement will be very important for understanding the impact of the sustainability strategies. Thanks.
Yeah, that's very good points there. I mean, I suspect that there are a number of approaches for monitoring out there, and I think it's just maybe having a look to see what there is, who's doing what. I think there isn't one recommended approach yet by national governments, but I think there is information going out there. They tend, of course, to focus more on sort of the CO2 energy savings because they're easier, but there are now more indicators out there looking at both the economic and social. For those that are interested in monitoring, there is work going on. It's maybe not as difficult as it may sort of first seem. Okay, then I think to the just a quick questions to you again, Espen, and this is hopefully be able to do this in yes or no before I could go to the final question. So the climate targets that you mentioned, do these really mainly focus on the city, or do they also focus on citizens and business as well? And second question, which could be a yes or no, fossil-free construction sites, do they also include the construction material, or is it only vehicles?
I'll go to the last. The fossil-free construction sites goes to the vehicles, so the excavators and the wheel loaders, and transportation to and from the construction sites. It does not yet go into the products and raw materials. And yeah.
And the targets, do they also include, is it mainly focusing on cities?
Yeah,
Procurement?
this is not a city, yeah. But
okay.
How, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect it must be quite complicated to then set targets for citizens and businesses. Okay, then the final question, because I think we have to wrap up within a minute or two. So the question which came at the start, actually, again, probably not so easy to do in a minute, but I want to go to each of you and say, what do you think the difference is between green public procurement, sustainable public procurement, and circular public procurement? Now, it's a challenge, but if you could do that within sort of 30 seconds to a minute each, that would be good. So, Marianne, I'd like to start with you there.
We can go into a very technical discussion on this, but I think the difference between, in layman's term, would be the green procurement, separate from a cycle procurement, is that you just take the immediate consequences of the product, whereby we target the circular economy, in other words, from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. Paolo, Espen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, green is a dimension of sustainable, because sustainability, we look at it from the three dimensions. So the environmental, the economic, and the social dimensions. And that's why green procurement is one angle of sustainability. And of course, circular economy is looking at the entire cycle and how you can reuse the products and services.
Mm-hmm. Espen, anything to add? You mentioned circular economy in your slides.
Yeah, for me as well, the same. The sustainability is everything, the social and the environmental. The green is the most narrow part, and the circular is, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I would add, actually, I think it's difficult to separate the three. I think there are terms, but I think even when you're using green public procurement, I think it's also possible to take into sort of course social, and it's very difficult to separate the two when writing a public procurement tender. And I don't think we need to be so worried about differentiating them. And I think circular can be more advanced work, but it is coming with circular procurement. Circular economy is taking off, I think, quite in a big way. Okay. Before I wrap up, I just want to mention that there were 2 other webinars at the Daring Cities being held on this topic. So yeah, there's a slide which outlines them. This will take place on Monday. It's on the 19th of October at 12 p.m. and at 4 p.m. CEST time. And the topic will be on sustainable construction procurement and sustainable food procurement. And there I think we're having speakers from the US, South Africa and Europe. So please do join us for those. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers. It's never enough, the time. We could go into a lot more detail, but I hope for the participants this is giving both a sort of broad picture, but also some specifics from cities. And as I say, if you do want to find out more about what ICLE is doing, what these cities are doing, what the OECD is doing, please do get in contact with us. And of course, we can share more information. I think, as I said, if climate is a problem, procurement is a solution, and I think it's completely underestimated. There's a lot of potential with procurement. It's a mechanism that's already in place within public authorities, and I think it's absolutely essential to use it. So thank you very much to all our speakers, and I'd like to thank the participants for joining us from around the world, and hopefully we'll see you again during the Daring Cities. Thank you very much, and again, hopefully you can hear a round of applause from everybody, from the participants. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.